Hello everyone, this is Leo from the Monkeys Make You Misplaced channel. Today I bring you the 5th installment of our Units to Buy In series. For this one we're going to talk about the Nation of Shadows Dark States. I did just buy a new mic. I'm hoping the quality does show in the video a little bit. I know I've spoken about how the Stoichea one was a little bit scuffed, so I put a little bit more extra effort into this one. Hoping you like it. But with that, let's go over the general spiel, right? So these first few slides will be similar in each video, but since I can't know which of the 6 nations you might pick to start, I will go over each of them in the respective video. There were certain restrictions I put in place when coming up with the list of units. For instance, I don't talk about orders, be they normal, blitz, or set. I only chose to talk about units themselves. I also included units that certain archetypes might need, but avoided those that might be a little too bland. Something like plus 5k isn't going to be exciting unless it has something else attached to it. We'll go in increasing grade from 0 to 3. I have group cards with similar effects and left those with more unique effects towards the end. And with that, we'll start with the grade 0s. Not much to say here, just like in the other videos. Pretty self-explanatory that you want to pick up a set of effect triggers. Although they can be expensive sometimes, they are a worthwhile investment. You'll be able to play them in pretty much every deck you play in respective nations. Then we have the over triggers. Obviously, you want to pick up the one for your nation, but like I've said before, we now have 2 generic ones in the red and blue over triggers. So again, picking up at least one of those is going to be great. Then we go into grade 1s with perfect guards, like another very obvious choice here. You want to have a set of perfect guards, and Dark States does have 3 perfect guards, as they have the Chronojet encounter deck, which provided us with another good perfect guard. Then let's move on to some of the more unique effects with soul charging effects, which Dark States is going to have quite a few, let me tell you. Starting with Gungram, who when placed on rear, soul charges 1. He also allows you to use your extra soul to draw a card. He averages about $3 to $4 a copy. Having a printing in set 1 and a reprint in the latest festival collection. Then following him we have Mechanic, who similar to Gungram can soul charge 1 when placed on rear. He can also move himself into soul to call a grade 3 Mechanic, although you're not really going to care about that effect, since you only care about him being able to move himself into soul whether you call or not. He is just 2 soul, so a lot of decks are just going to want that 2 soul, and that's all he's going to be. He is, however, quite expensive. He's about 17 bucks. As he can be played in both Dark States and Brandgate. Dark States being a nation that really loves soul, and Brandgate not having many good generic options like this that can just give you 2 soul. He is from set 8, I believe, and he's a triple rare, so that probably is why he's so expensive. But then let's move on to the biggest of the soul chargers, or I guess the most well known, in Brainwash Thriller, who soul charges 1 when placed, and if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, he gains plus 5 for every card soul charged, right? So if you soul charge 2, he'll gain plus 10. He can give you an insane amount of power, and since a lot of these Dark States deck care about soul charging, you got a lot of power in them. That effect though has given him quite a high price tag, being about 18 to 20 bucks currently. He has a reprint in set 9, and he was printed in set 4 prior to that. But we will continue this section with some cheaper options to help you maybe ease the blow a little bit, starting with Avid Reaper, who can soul charge 1 when he boosts a grade 2 or greater unit. He's about 20 cents, so he's much cheaper when compared to the previous ones. He's from the Drajul trial deck, so you might already have a set if you bought the trial deck. The last one in this section is Flaming Pony, who can bind himself from soul to soul charge 2. Essentially, he gives you an extra soul. Although you do need a way to get him in there are quite a few cards that I'll go over later on that can help you do this. He's from set 5, and I believe he has a promo printing as well. So you can get either. He's less than 20 cents. Now let's move on to soul charging, but different. And it's not called soul charging, but it still gives you soul. We start off with Ling, who when placed on rear lets you look at top 2, choose 1, put it in soul, and then you bottom the other. Having no cross is incredible, just being an on-play skill. She's pretty much a soul charge 1, but gives you more selections, so similar to Gungram, but you get to pick She's from the Jujul Tile deck and has received a reprint, so pretty cheap, but she's like less than $2 per copy, so she's still pretty cheap when compared to some of these other things. Following her, we have Inhale Pit, who lets you trade a grade 1 or greater card from Soul to put 2 grade 0s from drop into Soul. This is also an active ability, that means you can reuse it every turn given you have the 0s in drop. She allows you to not feel so bad about having to pitch triggers for the ride deck, and if you're using grade 0s to guard, well, this is a way to get them back. She's a common from set 4, so she's less than 5 cents, so go digging for bulk and you'll find her in there. Lastly, in this section, we have Sheena, who, when placed on rear from hand, allows you to move another rear guard into Soul, to look at the top card of your deck and call it or put it into Soul. She can give you 2 Soul or a rear guard and a Soul. You can even call a unit with higher grade than your Vanguard, but that is very luck dependent, so don't bank on it, right? She's quite a cheap card for a very unique effect, I think, in her grade. She's from set 6 and she's just a rare. Again, just bulk. Following this section, we have boosting effects. Starting with Luxual Songster, who, although I don't believe many units besides Lukier can use this effect, she is generic and gains both power, and when the unit she attacks, the attack she boosted hits, she will move into Soul and draw a card. She's about 25 cents to a quarter for a double rare from set 8. This is more of a future play, honestly, as we might see more effects like Pale Moon popping up in Dark States, as I hope they branch out into maybe something a little bit different than just like big Soul, big equal like effect. Then we have Zargon, who when boosting gives the unit they boosted an ability until end of turn. That ability is to put 2 cards from drop into Soul when the unit's attack hits. So if you have a unit that restands, or if your Vanguard restands itself, then you can do multiple uses of this effect. However, even if you don't, the on-hit pressure of this effect is enough. She is 50 cents, as she is just a rare from set 9. So she's another card I would highly recommend getting a set of. Following that, we have Falcate Performer, who on boost allows you to pick a card from drop, and if your Soul does not have a card with that same grade, you can put it into Soul. She's one of the more expensive cards in this section. She's about $8 per copy, having just come out in set 7, I believe. She is generic, although I do believe there are better choices here that aren't as restrictive. I know that she is expensive because she is played in Drajuled, but if you're not playing Drajuled, I can definitely see you playing something else. Maybe something like this following card, Jewel Core Dragon, who on attack or boost just gains +5, and then at the end of the battle, he'll go into Soul. I remember him being quite expensive upon release, but since he got reprinted in Festival Collection, he's less than $1, so you'll be lucky there. With that, let's move on to some of the more strange effects in the grade 1 portion here. Starting with some card draw with Gerstein, I don't know how to say that, who, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, lets you counterblast 2 to draw a card. Another trial deck card from Drajuled, so if you could just buy the Drajuled trial deck and you would get some pretty decent cards in my opinion. She's less than 20 cents, so again, you're not looking at Bank Breaker here. Then we have another unique effect in Zito, who when placed on rear from Soul lets you put a card from drop and put it into Soul. This effect can help you sometimes if you need to put specific things into Soul. It is quite difficult, however, to proc, as you have to put him into Soul with your Vanguard's ability. But he's less than $1 since he came out, I think, in the 2022 Festival Collection. Then we have a countercharger here in Brick Gardner, who can bind himself to countercharge 1 when put from rearguard a circle to Soul if your damage has 4 or more face down cards. It is a little bit restrictive, but if you have no better options, then he's at least very cheap, less than like a cent. You can probably find him in your bulk, right? Following that, we have Demon She-Rider, who is the Dragon Tree unit for Dark States. The first effect is only relevant if you're playing Griffogilla with Dark States or a Mass deck. And currently, we only have Drajuled Mask or Astroya Mask, but we are getting Greedon Mask in set 11, and that will release the Friday after this video is posted. So Greedon Mask is literally over the horizon. And then we have Omini Gruzio. Don't really know how to say his name yet. mask, who is also coming out in set 12. So we have quite a few Dark States masked unit coming out. But now let's talk about his second effect, which is the generic one. He allows you to Soul Blast 2 if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, to call a grade 1 or less card from Soul to rearguard in the same column. So if you have excess Soul, or maybe your deck doesn't really care about like having a lot of Soul, it just needs specific numbers, something like your Jeweled, he'll just let you call some grade 1s back. Something like Jewel Core Dragon, which we had talked about earlier, could be there, right? You just keep putting it back in, and then he'll keep getting it back out. Then last for the grade 1s, we have Amandine, who for a CB can increase the Soul Charge amount by 1 until end of turn. So any effect that says Soul Charge something, Soul Charge anything, is increased by 1 until the end of turn. Very unique effect, honestly. Not much like it currently. She also gains 10k if you have at least 10 cards in Soul, so be an 18k booster, pretty good. She's a very strong card. She's about $2 per copy, so I would definitely suggest getting a set of these, especially if you see yourself playing Dark States. She's from like set 6, so she's a little old, but with that, let's move on to grade 2s, and we're going to start again with Soul Charge, because by God, is there a lot of Soul Charging in this deck. We're about the halfway point here, so I'll pick up some speed. So all the units on this slide are less than 20 cents, and they all provide Soul. The first is Pestilent Talon, who, when in the front row, can Soul Charge 1 when your Vanguard is placed. Simple effect. Then we have Amazement Magician, who on attack allows you to Soul Charge 1. Lastly, we have Electro Spartan, who when placed, Counterblast 1 to Soul Charge 2. Now we have some more of these effects, starting with Jewel Neo, who can Soul Charge 1 when its attack hits a Vanguard. He's another child deck card who's less than 50 cents per copy, but if you like having on-hit pressure, making your opponent have to think each time you're attacking, then Jewel Neo is a good card because it forces your opponent to have to guard if they don't want you to reach a certain number in Soul. Moving on, we have Crimson Expeller, who when attacking a Vanguard, Soul Charges 1. This effect is mandatory. I need to remind you guys. If the effect doesn't say you may, that means you have to. So be very careful, because I know a lot of Dark States have the issue of decking out because they need to use a lot of Soul. Keep in mind that if an effect does not say you may, it is mandatory. You have to perform the rest of that effect. So things like Expeller here will Soul Charge regardless of if you want to or not. Then, when he is in Soul, he can Counterblast 1 and put himself into drop to give your Vanguard an extra 10k. Being able to be a good rearguard as well as a good card to get put into Soul by your other Soul Charging effect is great. He's less than 25 cents. He's from like set 2, so you're looking at a pretty cheap card. Then lastly here we have probably the best of in this section, who although is not the most expensive in this section. Who is Selfish Engraver, who can Soul Charge 1 when she hits anything, not Vanguard, nothing like that. She can also move into Soul. At the end of the battle, she attacked if your Soul has 10 or more cards, and then she countercharges you 1. Honestly, this is one of the best cards. If your deck can get to at least 10 Soul consistently, this is a great card to just countercharge, right? Much better than Brick Gardener, but like I said, in his case, maybe it's one of those things where you have no other choice. Maybe you can't get to 10 Soul, then this is going to be the best thing. Following this section, just like we did in the grade 1s, we have a Soul, air quotes, section. Starting here with Mystic Accordness, who when discarded from hand during the ride phase will move into Soul. Very simple effect. Another card from the trial deck. This Jewel trial deck, I'm going to be honest with you guys, was pretty stacked. But he just moves himself from into Soul whenever he's pitched, so you're pitched during the riot phase, excuse me. Less than 10 cents. Then we have Term Fractured Dragon, who when he hits a Vanguard, allows you to draw a card, then you put a card from your hand into Soul. If you need something specific, put into Soul. This guy's perfect. This is another way to have on-hit pressure if you really like it. Having no cost attached to it, just needing to hit is great. Then we have a similar effect in Amazing Frost, who doesn't need to hit, but instead trades a Soul for a draw, and then you get to put a card from your hand in Soul. He also gains power, but it is kind of irrelevant. You need to have at least 8 different named cards to gain +5, and then if you have 10, he gains +10. Not going to happen very often, but if it does, that's cool, right? Then we have Rising Dragon, who when placed on rear lets you put a card from hand into soul to draw a card. No cost, similar to Amazing Frost and Term Fracture Dragon, except doesn't require you to hit or doesn't require you to Soul Blast. Although this guy is about $5 per copy. I think all the previous cards I mentioned were either under 50 cents, I've had to say. Then we have some more choices in this Soul air quote section, starting with Steady Spiky. All of these are going to use CB, and they all cost less than $1, so I won't be going over their individual prices, but back to Steady Spiky, who when placed from hand can counterblast and put another grade 0 in your, from hand into soul to choose a grade 1 from soul and add it back to your hand. This is great if you put PGs into your soul by accident, like let's say you soul charge them or anything, he'll let you get them back. And obviously it hurts to trade a trigger for a perfect guard, but if you're putting in something like a draw trigger, then you would definitely prefer the perfect guard in hand. Then we have Matalvara, who when placed on rear guard can counterblast 1 to choose a card from drop and put it into your soul. Then if your soul has 4 or more cards with different grades, he gets plus 10. 20k attacker, pretty good. Last here we have Ultrasound Sire, who when placed on rear from hand can counterblast 1 to look at top 3, put 1 into soul. Then if you have 4 different grades, you draw a card. Very good effect. Just being able to like select what you want to put in soul, it's pretty good. And being able to draw a card as well. Essentially, this is a CB1 draw a card if you can get that effect rolling. The next section we're going to talk about is units that benefit from a high soul count or a soul count of like at least 7 or more. Starting with Asher Dar, who gains extra shield if you have 7 or more cards in soul and moves himself to soul when used to guard. He's a double rare from set 3 that's like 15 cents. Next up is Metallized Erosio, who causes the opponent's rear guards in the same column as him to lose intercept and boost if you have 7 or more cards in soul. They also can't gain these abilities, so things like Ava would really hate this. He's just a common, which I don't know why people haven't really thought of playing it, but I guess with so much removal available, it is a little hard for him to stick around on the board. But he can cause some real damage if a deck, like, you could stop things like Leonore by being making it unable for them to boost. Right, Leonore doesn't really have any ways to remove this during the main phase. Then we follow that with Hypno Grasper, who gains boost when there's at least 6 or more, and then he gains an extra 10k if you have 12 or more. So being a 20k booster is just pretty good. This is a common from, I believe, set 7. So you're looking at a pretty cheap card. The last card here is Kiagra, who when placed on rear allows you to perform 2 different effects. The first one, if you have 7 or more cards in soul, lets you counterblast 1, discard a card to choose a card from your soul and put it into your hand. Then you soul charge 1. Another way to get PGs or maybe some key pieces back into your hand. And then if you have 13 or more, all of your front row units get +5 until end of turn. Way to give your board an extra 15k power, essentially. He is like 25 cents, so he's pretty cheap. I know people think that he's specific to Barrow Magnus, but he really isn't, so maybe he would be worth playing. Now let's talk about some units that can provide some removal. We start here with Eden, who can on hit counterblast 1 to retire a rearguard. He's a triple rare from set 3 with a price tag of about $3.50 per copy. Next is Derek, who can counterblast 1, put another rearguard into soul to retire a rearguard for every 4 cards in soul. You can get some crazy amount of removal. He does have more of an effect, but if you're not playing things that can get Final Rush, that effect is irrelevant. He's like 50 cents. If you really want to have removal, Derek is perfect if you can get that high soul count, which a lot of Dark States decks are going to have regardless, so be pretty good to get them. Then we have Clean Sweep Dragon, who can, if you Persona Ride or Persona Road this turn, counterblast 1 to choose a total of up to 3 rearguards, either yours or your opponent's, and move them into soul. Then he gains a +5 for each one. So he can be a 25k attacker that gets to remove your opponent's units and put them into soul. Although it is a little rough to be giving your opponent's soul, if the benefit of them having the rearguards outweighs them having a little bit more soul, then I believe he's pretty good. I mean, his price tag is about 350, so he's on par with things like the triple rare Eden. So clearly he's doing something right. Lastly, we have some of the extras in grade 2. Again, starting with some card draw and Pearson Assistant, who if you soul charged by a card's ability, Persona Ride, and Counterblast 1, you can draw a card. Quite a few hurdles to jump through, but if you really need it, she just sits there, can get that effect done. Pretty good. Then the next card we have is Granary, who lets you Soul Blast 1 to make it so your opponent cannot intercept. That is until end of turn. So things like Ava are going to have a struggle because now they can't use their obfuscates to intercept. So even better than the card I'd mentioned previously by just being able to make them unable to intercept at all. Right? They can't remove your unit. This ability is just for you until the end of turn. Then we have Kennen, who when placed during the main phase lets you Counterblast 1. So look at the top card of your deck and call it. Just an extra unit. Who doesn't want an extra unit? If you're not using that much DP, this cat will get you that extra unit. Maybe you hit something really good. If you, worst case, you hit a trigger, put it behind Kennen, you got a 14k column. Still hits Van. Then we have a Violetta, who can come out from Soul for a CB if you have at least 10 or more cards in there. She's a promo, but again, she's like less than $1, so you're pretty good. And she can keep coming back if you keep putting her in her Soul, so maybe like something like Barrow Magnus would love to just be able to pull her out of Soul and then put her back in. Lastly, we have the Dark State Cycler, who when placed from hand to rearguard if you Persona Ride, can Counterblast 1 to call a card from your Soul, then Soul Charge 1. She's about $5, as she is pretty good and she's very generic. So if you can get yourself a set of these, I would highly recommend it. But with that, let's move on to some grade 3s. Starting off with yet another air quotes Soul section, because like I said, Dark States is honestly one of the least diverse nations out there. Making almost every deck rely on Soul makes it hard to make each deck stand out, but regardless of that, let's move on to Record Break Dragon, who when placed on rear from hand can Counterblast 1 to look at top 5. Choose up to one card with a different card name than the cards in your Soul, and then put it into Soul. Quite hefty cost, quite a unique effect, but if you have no better choices, which I'm going to provide you with some more here, but if you honestly need a lot of Soul or you need selective Soul, then I could recommend it. But with that, we move on to Zelmort, who can move himself into Soul and Counterblast 1 to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and then you can choose to call one of them to rearguard or just put them all into Soul. So essentially, you get 3 extra Soul, which is pretty good. But hey, maybe you get another unit that can Soul Charge 1 on place. Maybe you could hit something like a Brainwash Swirler or something like that. And he'll make up the Soul that you have to give up by calling him, right? Then we have Time Jarrett Dragon, who is very similar to Rising Dragon from the grade 2 section, although his price tag is significantly cheaper. Time Jarrett Dragon is maybe 10 cents on TCG Player. But he just says when he's placed on rear, you can put a card from your hand into Soul, and then you just draw a card. Very cheap, very simple effect. If you can't afford Rising Dragons because they're $5, there's Time Jarrett Dragon. Sure, you have to wait until you're at grade 3, but I think you'll be fine, right? Then lastly, here in this section, we have the OT user from Dark States in Crucial Dragon. Same effect as the previous ones. He gains power and shield if your opponent gets a trigger. Then when he attacks while not boosted, you can put another rearguard in the same column as him into Soul and perform one of the following, or perform all of the following. Choose an opponent's rearguards and retire it, then give him +5. And then if you remove the over trigger from drop, your opponent can now call grade 1 or greater hand cards from hand to Guardian Circle until the end of that battle. Remember, this does not stop Blitz orders. This specifically says from hand to Guardian Circle. Blitz orders do not go into the Guardian Circle. They go into the order zone, which is confusing, but I guess, right? And then let's move on to the extras. We're starting with a promo here in Vorpal Scythe Dragon, who can Soul Blast 2 to choose an opponent's rearguards and retire it. And then when its attack hits, you can Soul Charge 2. He feels its own effect. He's pretty good. If you want retire, I know that in the future, the new Dark States boss that's coming in the trial decks alongside Graham Grace and Orphist. I can't remember his name. Something like Fafnir or Fafnir. I know he cares about cards and soul, so this guy would be perfect. He also cares about units being retired, so if you're very interested in playing that deck when it comes out, I would suggest getting a set of Vorpal Scythe. Pretty cheap. He's a promo, but again, he hasn't been played anything yet. Moving on, we have two very similar effects in Curtis and Brian here, who can, for a Soul Blast 2 in Curtis's case, or a Counterblast 2 in Curtis's case, and a Soul Blast 2 in Brian's case, give your front row an extra 5k. You get an extra 15k power, and in Curtis's case, you can activate that ability multiple times, so you can give your front row an incredibly large amount of power if you're not using Counterblast or anything. So if your rear guards or your vanguard restand, then you can just give them a bunch of power. They're both rare, so again, very cheap. And then the last card we're going to talk about here is Miroslava, who is worded quite weirdly, so I'm going to talk about her effect differently than it's worded, because if I say how it's worded on there exactly, it is going to be confusing. But when she's placed on rear guard from hand, during the main phase, you can Counterblast 1 to choose a card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard. If it's the same name as your Vanguard, you add it to your hand. And if it is not, you call it to rear. Then, if you put a card into your hand, she gains an extra 5k. Her effect is very weirdly worded, but I pretty much give you the gist of it. You don't read it because it is confusing, because the commas are here and stuff like that. But with that, we end the Dark States episode, so only one left until the release of set 11. Lyrical isn't getting any support in set 11, so not going to be very relevant, but we still want to do all 6 nations, since this is pretty much a series that I enjoy doing. But with that, this has been Leo from the Monkeys Making Misplaced channel. I hope you have a great day.